What's up, guys? How's it going? Thank you very much, everybody, for joining. I'm a bit last minute today. It's been a busy day at work. I've just got to a hotel. The Wi-Fi at the moment is holding out. Thank you to all of you, though, that have been in the chat all afternoon. I've dipped in and out a couple of times, and I've been really pleased to see so many of you joining the discussion. There's obviously lots to talk about. It wasn't the most thrilling of Grand Prix, was it, over the course of the weekend? Another dominant display by Max Verstappen and Red Bull, but how often have we been crying out for something to change because it's been so predictable that Lewis Hamilton's been winning everything. So look, come on here, we've got it. We've got somebody different. And the fact that Max Verstappen won that race and the fact that Red Bull appear to be so dominant, you know, is a little bit misleading. They have the fastest car. They are doing the best job right now, but it's closer than it's been for years. And as we've said week in, week out, there are a number of scenarios where it's not too far away, Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes coming out on top. So this championship is far from over, but we've got an interesting fight. And so I'm looking forward to seeing your discussion over the course of the next hour or so. The chat appears to be frozen on my end, so let me just restore that. There we go. I hope you're all taking part. I can't see. Oh, we can see it on screen here. Okay, so welcome to all of you from all over the world, as ever. Let me just see if I can get the chat in my side here, because I can't read it on this tiny little screen. Let me see. There we go. Right, hello from Dundee, Brad the Fitter. Hello to everybody. Redmond Barry says, first question, what's that shirt? This shirt is getting a little run out ahead of tomorrow's big game. Come on, England. Come on, you know that. Yeah, I'm at a hotel tonight ahead of some filming tomorrow. I'm going to be able to watch the game tomorrow, but it is going to be in the studio right at the end of filming. You've got a very busy schedule, so I hope you're enjoying the football. If you're into it, I can't wait for the game tomorrow, but that is another story altogether. Hello from Kenya, BT Kamuti. Hello. Hello from Utah, Russ Burton. Hello from all over the world. Hi from Russia. Hi from Glasgow. Hi from Barbados. Master Shifu. Welcome to you all, wherever you're tuning in from. I'm going to be very much led by you guys today because, well, mostly because I've done very little preparation, if I'm going to be really honest about this. I've been busy filming all day. Just got to the hotel, as I said, so very little time to dip in and out of preparing too much for tonight's show. But that's what you guys are here for, isn't it? You guys fire the questions in. I'll do my very best to answer them. So where would you like to start? I titled the video around the pit stops, slowing down of pit stops. I'll give you my opinion on all of that in a moment. Around the fact that Red Bull just simply seem to have the fastest car right now. How on earth has that happened when right at the beginning of the season it seemed so close? 7 years of Mercedes dominance appears to be toppling, doesn't it? Appears to be having its first genuine challenge from outside their own team. And me, for one, I'm loving it. I think it's great. So hello from all of you, or to all of you, wherever you are. Let's get the first questions in. Let's see who wants to start this. How will Mercedes... Oh, it's gone, hang on. Let's talk about why Marc can get the FIA to focus on rear wings, pit stops and the engine shortly, says Gerben Minhuis. I knew you'd ask that, and so that is where we're going to start. Let's start by talking about how this championship seems to be in much the opposite to the way that things have been over the last few years. This seems to be Mercedes on the back foot. It seems to be Mercedes squabbling, shouting, complaining, moaning, trying to get things banned, trying to get the FIA to look into things, to step in, to do whatever it takes to try and somehow balance the performance over the course of this year. Something that over the last few years, it's been everyone else trying to do that to Mercedes. So is that what Mercedes are doing right now? Well, when it comes to rear wings and flexi rear wings, we've had that saga over the past couple of months. Yes, that was led by no small part from Mercedes. Mercedes looked at the way Red Bull were gaining speed along the straights with that flexible rear wing. They looked at the onboard footage and they very publicly highlighted that to the FIA. What was interesting about how they highlighted that was it was very much led by Lewis Hamilton. Now, knowing what I know about what goes on inside Formula One teams, around those engineering meetings and so on, I'm pretty certain, or I'm at least relatively confident, that that wasn't just Lewis Hamilton coming out, doing his own thing, saying something in public, in a press conference, around those flexi rear wings that Red Bull were displaying earlier on in the season. For me, that was something that could easily be engineered by the team. Lewis Hamilton's the biggest mouthpiece of that team. He's the biggest mouthpiece in Formula One. When Lewis Hamilton speaks, people listen. The media listen. The media drum up, some sort of storm around the words that comes from Lewis Hamilton's mouth. And yet, when it came to that bendy rear wing saga, that's probably exactly what Mercedes intended to happen. So in an engineering meeting, in a debrief, the engineers would have spoken to Lewis. They would have showed him footage of that rear wing flexing at speed. They would have talked about what the team, Red Bull, would have been gaining down the straights with that flexible rear wing. They would have complained internally in their own discussions about how that potentially breaches the rules. And then Lewis Hamilton comes out and says it in public, and the rest is history. This thing bubbles up into a massive media storm. It ends in the FIA conducting an investigation, and those rear wings get banned. Now, it's far from being that straightforward and that simple, but now we're in a saga where Mercedes, notably through Lewis Hamilton, are now complaining about Red Bull's engine, about how they must have gained performance with the latest engine. I know Toto Wolff talked about this too, and this is not a Lewis Hamilton bashing session, believe me. You know I'm a huge Lewis Hamilton fan. But I heard, as we all did during the race on Sunday, what seemed to me like a potentially orchestrated discussion where Lewis Hamilton asks on the radio, knowing, as the Mercedes team would do, knowing that message is going to be broadcast, how much are Red Bull gaining over us on the straights? And the answer came back, seems around 2.5 tenths, Lewis. Now that's not a discussion you need to have during the middle of a Grand Prix. It makes no odds to Lewis Hamilton or to Mercedes to have that discussion in the middle of a race as to how much Mercedes might be gaining on the straights. Now, I may be speaking out of turn here, but it felt a little bit orchestrated to me in a similar way to the bendy rear wing saga. Now, I don't know where this is going to go. I don't know if this will bubble up. I don't know if Mercedes strongly suspect that Red Bull might have done something with their power unit, with the introduction of their second unit, which, as you know, came in a couple of races ago, that might have somehow increased performance. I'm sure most of you also know that the teams have very accurate GPS data that shows the performance gain, particularly along the straights, where everybody's obviously flat out. They know their rear wing levels to some extent, so they can see if the car has a massively slimmer rear wing, which, by the way, Red Bull does have. Over the last couple of races, they've employed a lower drag or lower downforce rear wing. Naturally, that's going to give them more speed, but Mercedes seemed confident enough to me to be very public and very vocal about how they seem to suspect that potentially there's been something with the introduction of that latest engine. Now, the rules specify that the only upgrades you can bring to a power unit during the course of this season are for reliability purposes. I have no doubt that that's exactly what Red Bull will have done if they brought anything different. They say their engine's the same specification, so I don't know where this is going to go, but for me, it's intriguing to the fact that Mercedes seem vocal enough to be having these discussions in public, and it's raising the questions, it's raising the awareness. We're having this discussion right now off the back of those kind of comments coming from Lewis and Toto and the team. So I don't know, what do you think about where this might all be going? Is it sour grapes for Mercedes because they are now being threatened from the outside, or is this the media, myself included perhaps, blowing this into a storm that's actually just a little teacups worth of wind blowing around, and we're creating something out of it that perhaps isn't there? Let me know what you think. Right. Steve YouTube says they can't handle how well Red Bull's doing, and that will be a very common theme amongst race fans. Let's not forget, Red Bull have been the complainers over the last few years. Mercedes have been the ones sitting all high and mighty, doing the great job, and they have done a great job. There's been very few complaints about what Mercedes have been doing, other than total respect for their incredible performance. It's been the public show of frustration has often been towards Red Bull because they've been complaining when things haven't been going their way. Is it now turning in the opposite direction? Let me see. Do you think Max getting reprimanded for his finish line burnout was justified? Was it dangerous? Now, different subject, but on that one, yes, I do. I do think that Michael Massey and the FIA have to clamp down on that. In that particular instance, it wasn't necessarily dangerous. He didn't put anyone else in danger. However, there are circumstances where that can cause a very dangerous scenario, and probably the best thing is to stamp it out right now. There have been incidents in previous races in different categories. I think notably maybe F2, I think it was, where there was a big accident on the start-finish line with a similar kind of thing, with a driver trying to do burnouts in his grid slot for the forthcoming second race in an F2 event, which caused a big accident. So I don't think that should be allowed, and I don't think there's anything in that. Let me see. After Ferrari's 2019 engine fun and games, I doubt Red Bull would do anything similar 2 years later, says Daniel Richardson. I'd be very surprised if any team nowadays in Formula One thought they could pull a fast one in introducing a performance upgrade with an engine when those things are clearly banned. It's very, very unlikely that that kind of scenario would play out. But perhaps we've said that before in Formula One, and maybe it's naive to think that nobody would ever do that again, because over years, time and time again, we've had scenarios exactly like that, where somebody has blown our minds by trying something that's clearly illegal, hoping they might get away with it. BAR's fuel tank is one of the big ones that springs to mind. But I'd be surprised if Red Bull would do that in this day and age. And maybe we should be just giving them the same amount of respect we've been giving Mercedes over the last few years for doing a really good job. Red Bull weren't even the fastest in the speed trap in Austria. McLaren were. Absolutely, that's a very good point. It's not that they were the fastest, it's that Mercedes will have been looking at the data they have on Red Bull, i.e. the GPS traces, which, by the way, are very accurate to within a couple of feet now, GPS signals from the Formula One cars, the GPS positioning data. So they know how fast they're gaining down the straights relative to another lap on the weekend or another session in the weekend. For example, Q3 is when everyone knows that everybody has everything turned up to the max. That is the max you're going to get out of all of the top 10 cars in that Q3 session. There is no reason not to give it everything. So that can be a baseline that all the teams then measure everyone else against, whereas every other session you don't quite know how much battery power they're using, you don't know whether they're on fresh tyres, you don't know all these different parameters. Q3 is a really good baseline to know that's the maximum that every team might have. And from there, you can figure out what they're doing at different parts of the race weekend. So I'm not saying, no one's saying that Red Bull are the fastest in the speed traps, but you make a good point, Daniel, in that actually McLaren are even faster than Mercedes with a Mercedes engine down the straights. And that partly stems from the fact that Mercedes themselves are having to run a higher downforce level than some of the other teams, certainly than Red Bull, just to keep their tyres in check, to keep their tyre management alive. Red Bull, and this is perhaps the counter argument to all of this, Red Bull simply have a better car with better tyre management and therefore are able to run a lower downforce setup, therefore lower drag, therefore higher speeds down the straight, while still maintaining their tyre management over a race stint. That could simply be the difference. But as ever happens in Formula One, teams are now questioning how somebody could have gained that much performance in such a short space of time. Is it true that you were heard chanting reverse to first prior to Bottas' spin in the pit lane? That is a little joke that anyone who's read my book will fully understand. No, there is no truth in that rumour. I'll leave it there. More reliability can unlock more power if before they have run at a lower percentage to avoid engine damage, says Danny. So that's another good point. These engine upgrades, if you're allowed to bring an engine upgrade only for reliability, potentially that reliability could unlock a little bit more performance. But the FIA are very switched on to this. This is not something that you can say, well, we can't run at full power because our engine will blow up. So we come up with this upgrade which will stop the engine blowing up, but will now allow us to run at full power. That would count as a performance upgrade. But there is some grey area in amongst that kind of dealing. And so it could well be that that's the sort of thing that Mercedes are hinting towards in that kind of regard, in that a reliability fix for the engine has potentially unlocked a little bit of performance. And that's not unusual in a small amount. You know, if your engine is tired and gradually wearing over time, of course, it loses performance. When you bring in a fresh power unit, you expect a performance upgrade. It's just that Mercedes think that performance upgrade has come at, has brought even more than they would imagine could come from a like-for-like engine replacement, even if they think you take into account the lower downforce rear wing that the team are now operating with. And by the way, those reliability fixes that you might bring to a new power unit have to be fully signed off and approved by the FIA. You can't just bring new parts and say, well, we changed them for reliability purposes. You have to approach the FIA and say, we want to make this change for this reason. The FIA then have to approve that and say, okay, go for it. Or, no, I'm sorry, you can't do that. So it's not something that that Red Bull could just slip in under the radar. It's nothing to do with the Honda engine. It's the inherent advantage that comes with having a high rate car allows them to run less wing. And that is another very good point. That is part of, and the ultimate crux of all of this season is that Red Bull actually just have a better car. They have a better car, partly, as you say, because the regulation change between 2020 and 2021, which has hampered the performance on the low rate cars, which, let's face it, is mostly Mercedes and Aston Martin. Almost everybody else now, certainly the bulk of the rest of the field, and certainly Red Bull, run this extreme high rake, which has been less affected by the aerodynamic changes that have been brought in for this year. So that's a big part of all of this, and that's why Mercedes are on the back foot. And it's not just about downforce creation, it's not just about outright, lap time. This is actually much more, particularly on race day, about tyre management, about keeping tyres alive and opening up strategy options, because you can extend your tyre life stints over the course of a race. Mercedes are much more hampered in not having the longevity in a set of tyres that Red Bull are able to achieve typically. And look, we're going back to the Austrian Grand Prix circuit, same circuit this weekend, but with a softer range of tyres, which is almost certainly going to suit Red Bull even more. Now obviously caveat that with the fact that there could easily be rain this weekend, which could change the whole dynamic. But if it's another dry race, I would expect this set of circumstances on that circuit with a softer range of the Pirelli tyres, which you've got this weekend, to suit Red Bull even more. And let's face it, they had the quickest car last weekend. If that's the way it plays out, I would expect this race to come to Red Bull even more this coming weekend too. So Mercedes are on the back foot and are desperate to not let this championship slip away. They've already said they've stopped bringing performance upgrades to the car. We've discussed this in previous weeks about exactly what that means. Now, how have they stopped? Have they stopped producing parts? Have they stopped designing parts? Have they stopped manufacturing parts and bringing them to the racetrack? Or are they somewhere in between that schedule? Because the schedule between designing components and actually seeing components on the car, can be a reasonably long lead time. So to say you've stopped could be anywhere in that stretch of time between the drawing office and the end component reaching the racetrack. So we don't know if Mercedes are going to bring something else or not. We don't actually know if Red Bull are going to continue to bring components or for how long, but that could be the difference in this championship. Mercedes are on the back foot. If they can't find something reasonably drastic, this championship is only going one way. Most people thought the floor changes would be more of a negative for the high rate cars, but it hasn't been, says Corolla Roo. Totally agree, and I hold my hands up and I say I would fully agree that that's what I thought. When I first looked at the drawings of what was going to change for 2021, my first thought was, well, okay, the high rate cars have got an even bigger gap ahead of the rear wheels between the floor of the car and the racetrack. They've got an even bigger gap to seal. Now, all the little flick ups and slots and details around the rear of that floor were all about sealing that gap. Now, losing that section of floor, which has been done for this year, the natural assumption was that it was going to hamper those high rate cars who rely on sealing that huge gap between the racetrack and the cars floor for their undercar downforce, that it would hamper them in a greater effect. In reality, the effect of all of this has been the opposite, and it's partly to do with the height that floor sits on the high rate cars and where things like the brake ducts sit. The fins on the brake ducts have a huge impact, a bigger impact than most people think on partly sealing that underfloor, sealing the underside of the diffuser. The way that a lower rate car sits in relation to the height of the brake duct is very different to that of a high rate car, and therefore they don't seem to be having the same impact. And actually it's that's perhaps having more of a negative effect on the lower rate cars than it is on the higher rate cars. So not the obvious way that a lot of people thought it would play out, including me, I would hasten to add. Toto said they won't bring any new front wings. Toto says no more developments. Yeah, so that's what I mean. Toto says no more developments, but exactly what that means I don't know, and whether they might turn the tap back on if the championship was close enough, if they thought they could have some impact by bringing a new component that might fix some of the problems they're suffering with, maybe they would, or maybe the problems are so inherent, with that lower rate setup they have, they perhaps feel that this championship is something of a lost cause and that there's no way they can recover the losses to Red Bull over the course of this year. Maybe they have to write it off and start focusing on next year. I kind of hope not, because I want it to be close, but look, this is Red Bull's year right now. They have everything in their hands. It's theirs to lose, and if they keep pushing the way they are, maybe it just falls in their lap. What happened to George Russell's engine? So I actually haven't seen an official line on George Russell's engine, but everything I saw suggested that they had a pneumatic leak. You'll have seen in the pit stop the guy with the air bottle on his back, a hose pipe coming off that air bottle, jamming it into the side of a little valve on the side of the floor. It's very common. The pneumatic system on a Formula One power unit runs things like the valves in the engine. They're pneumatic valves, and you have a pneumatic system that obviously keeps that system pressurized. If you have a failure or a leak, there's a pneumatic reservoir that's often inside the cockpit behind the driver's seat. That's what keeps that system topped up over the course of a Grand Prix. But if you have a leak and it's using more air than normal, that reservoir, of course, eventually runs out of air, and in the pit stops it's not that uncommon to have to recharge the reservoir. Now, you don't want to be doing that in a normal pit stop because it would take longer, as you saw, than the 2 seconds, but if you have a failure, that's the solution to it. It seemed to me that leak that was on George Russell's car was so significant that they were having to top it up every couple of laps, and in the end it was pointless to continue. So heartbreaking for George Russell. He is learning how to deal with failure in the harshest possible way in the early part of his Formula One career, isn't it? But perhaps over time that will stand him in good stead. And I have no doubt that George Russell has a bright future ahead of him. These tough days, I'm sure, will work in his favour as he goes further down the line. What's your thoughts on Bottas's penalty for his rookie pit stop spin? Says Susie B. My thoughts on the penalty are probably fair enough. It's dangerous, isn't it? You can't spin a car in the pit lane. He was very lucky that there was nobody, there. There was nobody in the way that got hurt. That car was out of control. There's no other way to describe it. It was out of control. Pit lanes are, busy with personnel, and you cannot be out of control in that part of the racetrack. So I think you've got to clamp down on it. It was a harsh penalty, but I think probably justified. Tough on him though. I honestly felt for Valtteri at that moment, because it was early in the weekend, and look, over the last few weeks he's had a tough spell, both in terms of results, but I imagine mentally, in that he must be starting to doubt his own performance. He's got the media talking about George Russell potentially being in that seat for next year, how lots of people think that Valtteri's done and dusted and he should be long gone. You lot included, by the way, with your Valtteri Bottas jokes. And I felt for him, because when something like that happens, whether it's completely his fault or not, whether the team had asked him to try something different, You know, as a driver, in that moment, the world is looking at you, probably laughing. The internet's probably awash with memes. You know, it's one of those things that if you're already struggling mentally, those are the kind of things that can tip you over the edge. So fair play to him when it came to Sunday, that he actually delivered a pretty or a reasonably strong race result to get himself on the podium. Yes, it was helped by a slow pit stop at Red Bull. And it wasn't the most impressive drive, but to get himself on the podium is probably, and right behind his teammate, and on a day when Mercedes was struggling, is probably not a bad way to recover from a difficult couple of races. Let me see. Marc should have had him try a start in second gear from the end of the pit lane. Yeah, I think they tried to pull away in second gear, didn't they, from the pit stop box. I mean, look, you do have to try these things. These are things that, when it comes to race day, pulling out of your pit stop box, and let's not forget, the pit stop area is a different surface material at most racetracks than it is on the racetrack or it is at the end of the pit lane. So, you know, there is validity in trying these things in the pit stop area, because that's what you're going to do when it comes to the race. It's just that he got it horribly wrong, and you know, we saw the result. So it's a grey area. Yes, it was Valtteri that's in control of that car. Maybe the team asked him to do something different, but ultimately the driver is the one pressing the pedal and in control, or not in control, as the situation was then. Right, thoughts on the pit stop technical directive. Let's go there, because I definitely want to get into this. I'm a little bit angry about this. I'm definitely upset. I'm definitely annoyed. Bordering on angry. This is angry Elvis right now, because pit stops for me, and this isn't just because I was part of them for 10 years and loved every second of it, and I genuinely did. It was an amazing part of my career. The adrenaline rush is incredible, but I also felt part of something special when I was doing it. And you know, even more so now that it's you know, we're sub 2 seconds on some of these pit stops. That's an amazing feat of human endeavour. It's engineering brilliance, technical brilliance, but also human brilliance. To coordinate that many people in such a short space of time under such immense pressure, and yet to deliver something, particularly if you look at Red Bull right now, to deliver something over and over again, around 2 seconds, often sub 2 seconds, and if you are looking at Red Bull, almost always without failure. And almost always, I know they had a slow pit stop on Sunday, but it was a safe slow pit stop. It's, you know, I can't recall a time when Red Bull in recent memory have had a dangerous pit stop because they've been going too quickly. There have been a couple of issues. It's been further down the grid, and it certainly hasn't been because the pit stops have been sub 2 seconds. It's because the team or the equipment or the people or a combination of both, teams like Haas, unfortunately for them, have made mistakes. Now, I don't think that's grounds to start slowing down pit stops. Now, lots of people will be screaming that this is Mercedes again, you know, looking for something to claw their way back, you know, claw an advantage back towards the leading pit stop team, which happens to be their main rival in the championship. The only team that can consistently get below or around 2 seconds is Red Bull, but they're doing it safely. And for me, it's one of the biggest spectacles of Formula One. We've had a Formula One for years now where people have been complaining the racing's not exciting enough. There's been, you know, too processional, too predictable. The pit stops, if you switch on to a Formula One race, if you stumble across Formula One when you're flicking through the channels on a Sunday and you see a Formula One pit stop happen for the first time, sub 2 seconds, changing 4 wheels and tyres, that's mind-blowing stuff. That is the sort of thing that as a kid, and I know when I was a kid, that's exactly the kind of thing that made my eyes come out on stalks going, wow, that's incredible. I think those things have a place in Formula One. If we were getting people run over every week, if things were falling off cars or pit stops were going wrong every week from these teams that are conducting these perfect sub 2 second pit stops, absolutely, let's call it into question. Let's work out why that's happening. Is it because things are just too fast and people are sacrificing safety for a fast pit stop? But they're not. So for me, it's a real shame. It's one of the highlights of our sport that we should be celebrating and championing that no other sport has in that same degree. It's a unique thing to this sport, and one of our big selling points, for me at least. And yet now we are deliberately slowing it down. It's almost like a health and safety gone mad type thing for me. I mean, I want to know what you think on this, obviously, but those are my thoughts. That it feels like a cheap dig at a team that's done an incredible job when it comes to pit stops. You have to have total respect for Red Bull. And I do wonder if this was Mercedes that were conducting these pit stops, sub 2 seconds, week in, week out, whether we'd be having this discussion, because, and I don't want this video or this show to be, you know, a Mercedes bashing video. I'm a huge fan. I have total respect for what Mercedes have achieved over years and years. And I'm not saying this is all them just moaning and complaining, but that seems to be one of the, you know, some kind of general consensus here. And I have to say, with the way this pit stop technical directive has been issued, it feels unjustified, it feels like the wrong thing to do, and it does feel like a deliberate attempt to slow down the team that has the fastest pit stops, which also happens to be the team that's benefiting from them at the top of the Formula One Championship table right now. Let's see what you guys think. Michael Massey pushing his authority too far. Well, this definitely isn't just Michael Massey, so I'm not sure that's a fair accusation. This isn't, Michael Massey just doesn't make these decisions on his own. That's absolutely true. Everyone's usually all for safety in F1 though, says Josh Smith. Well, if we're all about safety, what are we going to do about cars travelling at 200 miles an hour? You know, this is one of those things that everybody in Formula One, and I include drivers and I include pit stop mechanics and everybody involved in the sport, knows what they're getting into. They're the very best at what they do. We don't ever question that a driver is doing 200 miles an hour in the car. We just say that they're the best in the business. They know how to control these cars. The cars are as safe as we can make them, yet they're still doing 200 miles an hour, sometimes wheel to wheel. That's incredibly dangerous, but we love it. We love it partly because it's dangerous, partly because we are pushing these guys to the limit, and more often than not, certainly at the front end of the field, they deliver week in, week out, because they are that good. For me, there's no difference between that and the pit stop crews, who equally are the very best in the business. And yes, of course, we've had some issues down the back end of the field, but that's no different to the Haas drivers spinning every week. That's the difference in performance across a team at one end of the grid to the other. That's just a difference in performance, and that comes with mechanics, with engineers, with drivers, with operations, with strategy. If you look at Mercedes, if you look at Red Bull, if you look at Ferrari, McLaren, typically these big teams at the front end of the grid operate safely and they operate at the very highest level. Of course, they're pushing the boundaries, they're pushing the limits, but isn't that what we want from Formula One? Both in the pit lane and on the racetrack? Safety is one thing, and if it was an obvious safety risk, you'd never have pit stops at all. I've stood in front of those cars where they scream towards you, and I've done the front jack where a car, back in the day, 120 kilometers an hour as the pit lane speed limit used to be, 15 meters away from you, still doing 120 kilometers an hour, jumps on the brakes and screeches to a halt at your ankles. It's terrifying, it's an adrenaline rush, but we practice it over and over and over again until we get it right. You're sending a driver at 200 miles an hour down towards a braking zone, which on the other side of that could be a brick wall or a tyre wall in some places. You're not saying to them, we can't do that anymore because if you get your braking wrong, you're going to be in the barrier. I mean, I know I'm ranting here massively, but I feel strongly about it because I think it's one of Formula One's biggest selling points. I don't see it as a safety risk that's so great or so, ridiculous or so kind of frivolous. We're not saying this is a frivolous safety risk. We're saying it's a measured safety risk. We've got the very best people in the business doing it, and we have to trust them. They can do it well. Right, I'm going to take a breath and read some of your comments on this. Can the FIA change their mind? Well, they can do whatever they want. It's a technical directive, so they can issue another one at any point, just like they issued this one, but very unlikely they're ever going to do that. How will they slow the pit stops down, says Maria Holland? Well, the way they're doing this, and many of you will know this already, they are introducing in the software that the teams all run to operate their traffic light system, a little bit like the way the start lights work, and there's a minimum human reaction time built in. So if a driver gets a reaction time off the start lights when the lights go out that's quicker than their mandatory minimum human reaction time that they deem humans can't react quicker than, it becomes a false start, even if they went after the lights went out. They're going to do something like that. So there is now a set minimum time. It's fractions of a second. We're not talking very much, but it's something like 0.2 of a second between all four wheels being done up and the green light being shown to a driver, for example. There's another one between the rear jack going down, or the jacks going down, and the wheels being tightened. So it's effectively trying to stop teams preempting lowering the jacks before the wheels are officially tight, which of course on one hand makes some sense, but it's not something we're actually having problems with up and down the pit lane. That's my point. Can we petition to roll this back, says CG Deluxe. If you find a petition or you start one, pop it my way, I'll sign it. The pit stops are exciting, says Maria. Yeah, totally agree. Red Bull finally showing their pace, super happy. Yeah, and look, this is being led by, let's make no mistake, Red Bull are class leading when it comes to pit stops. That's not by accident. That's because they've been incredibly clever in terms of the way their software operates, their systems operate, the way they've designed their technology, but also the way they've choreographed their humans, the people around that team. They are a very well-drilled team. They're the best. And everybody else is desperately trying to match up to them and haven't yet been able to. And that is where part of this frustration comes in. How will Red Bull actually be able to slow themselves down, says Whirly1. Well, it will be done by the software that runs the pit stop. So the team will do the same thing. The team actually won't change anything in their operations. The team won't change the wheels any slower. They'll do exactly the same thing they're doing now. It's just that the electronic signals that go from the guns being tight, for example, or the jacks being down, the way they trigger the traffic light system will have a built-in delay that's now going to be mandated by the FIA. So it won't change anything in what the teams do. It will just mean that the teams will no longer be able to affect that perfect pit stop because of getting everything just right, because there will be a minimum delay between their operations and the lights changing to green. Right, how are we doing for time? Yeah, all good. Why do the FIA not consult the teams? Well, I think there's an argument to say they have consulted the teams in some of this. Part of this has stemmed from the teams. It's certain teams, notably Mercedes, but perhaps others too, who have raised concerns about this to the FIA. So it has been some interaction from teams to the FIA. And look, when it comes to safety, if somebody questions safety, it is, to be fair to the FIA in some degree, it's very difficult for them to ignore that or to just gloss over it. If, teams had raised questions about safety and then next week there's a big safety issue in the pit lane, of course, this would look very bad on the FIA. So there's an element of that to this. I just think it's a real shame that if this is just sour grapes because one team is trying to claw performance back over another and using safety as a means to do it, it feels like that's a real shame. And we might be losing, at least to some extent, one of the biggest spectacles that Formula One has in its armoury, in its, unique to this sport. Hi Mark, I'm half English, half German. Who do you reckon I cheer for tomorrow? Come on, are you actually joking? Are you actually asking me that question? We won't get into massive football debate here, but obviously England are going to win. So if every pit stop goes 0.2 seconds slower, Red Bull will still be the fastest. And look, there is an argument to say that this isn't necessarily going to lose Red Bull their advantage, but what it may be that Red Bull still have the fastest pit stops. They might just be by a few fractions of a second slower than they would otherwise be able to do it. But that is the kind of level that Red Bull have been operating at. If everyone else can get to 2.5 seconds, and Red Bull, let's say for argument's sake, are now going to be mandated to be around 2.2 seconds. It's not going to be that much. But let's say it is. Red Bull may still have the fastest pit stop, but they lose that potential advantage that they have by operating at the very highest level and getting everything perfectly right, which is what they're striving to do every week. It takes away, that ability for the team to make the bigger difference in a pit stop, and that's what frustrates me. What would Bernie say about all this jazz? I would love to know Bernie's thoughts. Oh please, it's totally sour grapes, says Alex Lamas. Well, I'll leave you to make your own conclusions on that. 3-0 tomorrow, Mark. McLaren won race. I mean, I hope you're saying that's to England. If you are, I'll agree with you. No, come on, it's getting into football chat. Let's not get into football chat. Much as I'm well up for it, this is not what this show is all about. Right, don't forget the like button, says Susie B. Hit that like button, please. Thank you very much. So, McLaren admitted talking to the FIA over pit stops. So, yes, of course, it wasn't just... I'm not saying this was just Mercedes. This is not just Mercedes, with sour grapes over Red Bull. This is Mercedes and others who equal... I mean, let's face it, there is only one team that is consistently delivering these blisteringly fast pit stops, and that is Red Bull. So everybody has, something in pegging them, some advantage to be gained by pegging them back a little bit. So look, this isn't just about Mercedes, it's about everybody. I just think it's a shame that's what people are trying to do. Andrew Storm says it will hardly make any difference, and that may well be true, but it will make a difference, and that is my point. What do you think about the new tyres for Silverstone? Okay, so let's get into that chat. I haven't got my mini tyres here this week, so I can't bring those out. That's a shame. New tyres for Silverstone. So they trialled them over the weekend. The idea is to bring them in for Silverstone. They are a different construction that basically is going to be more robust. It's part of this plan to overcome the issues they had in Baku. Look, if we've got tyres that are so close to the limit that we're having to raise the tyre pressures by a couple of PSI and make these finite demands on when tyres come out the blankets, that to me says the tyres are too close to the limit of these cars. So if we have to bring something else in, as in a change of construction to those tyres to overcome that, we should just do it. Because it's the same for everybody, and this isn't something that is designed to peg back one team or another. It may end up having an effect like that, who knows? But this is genuinely off the back of some serious safety concerns a couple of races ago. It's very difficult to argue with that. And as long as that's the same for everybody, given that we clearly don't want to have those safety issues we had in Baku again, it may be that we wouldn't, because Baku is a fairly specific circuit, but we can't afford to risk it. So if Pirelli think that we have to bring something new in, and then let's bring it in. So yeah, no major concerns or strong feelings on that one. If anybody has any, let me know. I'd love to hear them. Hopefully they bring Mercedes back to the front. So they could do, couldn't they? We're talking about essentially a tyre that is going to be, it's not as simple as this, but it's going to be harder. It's going to be more robust. By its very nature, to prevent it from failing, it's going to be more robust. Now, Mercedes, we know, struggle on these softer, more fragile tyres. Red Bull thrive on those. So in theory, that new construction, if it's harder, and I don't know about the compound should remain the same, but because the tyre is more robust, potentially it could have some small effect towards Mercedes. It may well do. I'm almost certain that's not the intended impact that they're due to have, though. Are you going to Silverstone? I am going to Silverstone, but only, well, at the moment I'm only going on the Friday because I've actually got something else on for the weekend, but I will be there on the Friday at least. I'm actually doing some stuff with Red Bull that weekend, so if anyone's going, give us a shout, and maybe we can say hello. What else have we got? Silverstone will be hard on the tyres. It will, and look, everybody will, certainly at Pirelli, will be very mindful of the dramas that we've had at Silverstone in the past around tyres. So they will have that information. They won't be taking any chances, and of course that's part of the reason they want to bring them in for Silverstone. I really hope Red Bull Racing trouts Mercedes this season just because because of the way that Mercedes are operating. Marco brought this up, the way they use other Mercedes-powered teams to pressure the FIA. Well, there is a narrative now, as I said, growing around turning on Mercedes because there's a few of these issues that could be pinpointed towards the way Mercedes have been, talking things up in the press. Potentially trying to get rules changed, which is not something that's unusual in Formula One. Look, Red Bull have been doing this for years against Mercedes. It's not unusual, but there is a growing concern that Mercedes have had things their own way for a long time. I actually don't buy that. There's been a number of rules designed to specifically peg Mercedes back, and they've still overcome many of them. So I don't necessarily buy that, but yes, there is a growing feeling amongst a lot of race fans that people turning against Mercedes, which may or may not be fair. I think partly unfair at least. Nearly beer o'clock, says Crossfaded. Thank you very much. Or maybe some allergy meds. Yeah, I have got a runny nose, yeah. Yes, but I've got the beer ready. So nearly there. Right, what else are we talking about? Red Bull does a lot of cool, crazy things. The coolest F1 team by far. I love the way Red Bull have come into Formula One. Even back in the day, they just do things differently, and that's great for this sport. Formula One has become, over the years, quite corporate, much more so than it used to be. And I guess, Red Bull are bucking that trend. They always have done. So it's great for me that they're in this sport, doing things the way they do. And if they can get some success whilst doing things in their own way, that's great. It sort of proves you don't have to be super serious, super corporate to get results. And I think that can only be a good thing. Do you have a fridge full of beer, Mr. P? Well, all right, I'm in a hotel, so I've got a bar full of beer downstairs, so I'll be okay, thank you. Right. Anti-Mercedes over the years is going overboard. Well, look, people love to peg back whoever's out front. We've had so long a period of dominance from Mercedes that understandably people have got frustrated with that. They want to peg them back, they want to change the rules. Now we've got some challenge, and actually where it started this season where it was swinging one way or the other, in the last few races Red Bull have seemingly found a little bit extra performance and now almost look to be dominating to some extent, and people are now starting to say, well, this is Mercedes having sour grapes. As I say, there may be some of that, there may not be. We won't necessarily get into that right now. Right, what would Ron Dennis think of the way that Red Bull works, says Josh Smith? Well, that's a good point because Ron Dennis was there, of course, when Red Bull came into the sport, and I can tell you that he was almost horrified. Ron Dennis was almost the antithesis of Red Bull, wasn't he? He was so corporate and so serious. And, the way that Ron Dennis was also a big part of why McLaren was so successful, both on track, but also in the sort of commercial world. But Red Bull have a very different approach and have also been successful. So there's more than one way to win in Formula One. So whilst it certainly isn't the Ron Dennis way, I think he does and will respect the fact that anybody who can win in Formula One is clearly doing a number of things very, very well. It's not easy to win races. It's indescribably hard to win a Formula One championship. So anyone who can do it in whatever way, as long as it's legal and above board, you have to take the hats off to them. Danny Rick not good enough. He needs to turn it around soon, says G Thompson. He does, doesn't he? He's really struggling. I really feel for him actually, because we know he's a great driver. For me, he's one of the best drivers out there, and yet he's really, really finding it hard to get to grips with that McLaren. Whether it's something very specific to that car, something that he's struggling to get used to. Carlos Sainz said it was a weird animal. I don't know exactly what he's referring to, but Danny Rick is finding that hard. It's painful to watch, isn't it? Particularly when young Lando is doing such an amazing job in the same car. So he does have to find a solution to it. I'm sure he will, but it's taking longer than anybody really was expecting. Danny's not slow, Lando's just too good. Well, there's a little bit of that as well. I think it's a bit of both, isn't it? Lando, let's not take anything away from Lando. He's doing an exceptional job right now in that McLaren, taking that car to results that perhaps no one really expected it to be capable of doing. And at the same time, Danny's struggling, and the two opposite ends of that spectrum seem so far away from each other. But look, I don't think Danny's too far away. I think it's, as with anything in Formula One, it's the small differences in things like driving style, particularly in tyre temperature, that can actually make a huge difference to tyre performance. And that can change your lap time and certainly your race performance. So probably some small tweaks will find Daniel much closer to Lando over time. How's the renovation coming along? Oh, don't ask me about building, Stephen. It's been one of those days. Let's probably swiftly move on. Andy Murray's just won, says Free to Wheel. Congratulations, well done. How about flexi front wings? Well, that's flexi front wings. You'll have seen this bubbling up over the weekend. We've talked about it before. There's been a big discussion about flexi rear wings, and as you now know, there's some new testing procedures that have come in to overcome some of that. Now Red Bull have ignited the conversation about flexible front wings, which you'll have probably also seen the footage that that Mercedes clearly have. But it's not just Mercedes. A number of teams have flexible front wings. As we've said in the past, they are inherently more flexible than the rear wings just because of their design. But the Mercedes ones, having done all the complaining about Red Bull's rear wing, looks very, very flexible. And this still also plays into this entire narrative about Mercedes complaining because they're no longer fast enough. And Red Bull, I'm sure, are very happy to milk this story for as long as it goes. So I don't know where this is going to go, but you would have to argue if they're going to look into flexible rear wings on the grounds that it breaches a regulation about flexible bodywork, same thing should probably apply to the front. What was the deal with Ron Dennis and the uniforms at the end of every season? What was the deal? I mean, there was no deal. McLaren had some very strict policies about selling team kit. Back in the day, everybody used to get to the last race, which was often Brazil, go and sell their team kit in Brazil to all the fans out there, and that would essentially pay for your holidays over the winter. In more recent times, that became illegal within the team structure. So you are no longer allowed to sell your team kit, and essentially you had to sign it out and sign it back in. So there was no particular deal, but that's just the way that it works. Actually, not just at McLaren, at a number of teams. We need more testing with the new rules coming, says Eduardo Castro, and that's a very good point. We do, I think, need more testing. The smallest amount of testing we've ever had this year. Next year, of course, new cars, totally new rules. I think we are going to get a little bit more testing, but I think I'd love to see a lot more testing before we go racing. Not to the point where everyone has everything nailed down and it's perfectly reliable, but it's such a dramatic change next year that I think, we should be granted a little bit more track time ahead of the new season. So I still think that's up for debate by a number of teams. I think it'll be raised and discussed nearer the time, and we may well see that change as things come on. Thoughts on W Series? I actually didn't see it this weekend. Thoughts on W Series in general are that it's great. I think it's a really good platform. I think it's great that it's getting more exposure this season with F1 weekends, but I didn't actually see the racing, unfortunately, so I can't really comment on that. Are you suffering with a bit of a cold? Yes, I am. Thank you. Marc, you should get a COVID test. Don't you worry about that. I have had more COVID tests than I can possibly count. So yeah, I'm all good on that front. Done the team's testing. Maybe more private testing at a racetrack of the team's choice. Well, we used to do that, of course, all the time. The problem with that is it's very expensive. To hire a racetrack exclusively costs a huge amount of money. You have to have security, private security. It just costs an astronomical amount. So if you can do group testing you obviously save on that sort of economies of scale where everybody's contributing to the cost of things like the security, things like the circuit infrastructure that's needed to run cars around it. So, it just makes no sense anymore to do private testing on the scale that we used to do. Let me see. Austria is sold out, full capacity. Is it? I mean, that's great if it is. If we can do it safely, then brilliant. I'm all up for that. Unique challenges with the change to 18-inch wheels and tyres, says Brian Anderson. So that's a good one to sort of wrap up on as we've got a couple of minutes left. Obviously, that's coming in next year. 18-inch rims, low-profile tyres. We may have covered this before. But I think the thing with this, the big thing with this, is that a lot of the suspension travel on a current Formula One's car is taken up with that squash of that big balloon tyre. We're no longer going to have that. Those small, low-profile tyres are not going to squash in the same way. The biggest change there is that suspension travel that's currently taken up in the squash of the tyre is going to be moved under the control of the car's suspension. And the teams are going to love that because that movement then falls under their control, which means they can manipulate it. They can design their suspension and tweak their suspension to manage that movement in the way that they deem optimum. That's an engineer's dream, something they can't do with tyres because the tyres are not their component. They squash in the way that they all squash the same. It's a Pirelli designed thing, and the teams at the moment just have to sort of deal with that and manage it. Next year, they will have a lot more control about how the car behaves, but of course it's going to take a complete redesign of the entire suspension system to be able to take up a lot more of that compliance in the suspension that's currently taken up by the balloon tyre. Right. Where are we up to here? What we got? 2 minutes to go. Prediction for the Austrian GP weekend this weekend. Right, let's finish on that because my prediction is, I sort of touched on it earlier, that this weekend, given that same track, softer tyres than we had last weekend, it should favour Red Bull. The caveat is the weather. It can change in a moment in Austria, as many of you know, it's in the middle of the hills. Things can change in a split second, and that can totally throw the weekend. Probably that's exactly what Mercedes will be hoping for over the course of this weekend, because that's perhaps their only chance, their only opportunity to do something to overcome Red Bull. I think that's perhaps the one thing they can rely on. If it's a dry weekend, given that we're not going to be changing the cars between this weekend and next weekend, it's only the softer end of the tyre range that changes. That's really going to favour a Red Bull that works better on the softer tyres anyway. We know the Mercedes is better suited to the harder end of the Pirelli range. We're going the opposite way to that. So any performance advantage Red Bull had, for me, is going to be locked in even more with the softer end of the tyre range. And on that note, get your predictions in. If you're using the SeedStream app, please go and get the app. I'm going to be doing a special giveaway on the SeedStream app in the next few weeks, so get that downloaded onto your phone. It's available on iPhone or Android right now in the beta version we're currently operating in. You'll get some great F1 content, but you can also take part in our little predictions league. You can go and do that right now. And on that note, I'm going to say goodbye. I'm going to smash this down and go and blow my nose at the same time. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining me tonight, for taking part, for all your input and questions. I hope you really enjoy the weekend, and I will catch you again next Monday. So for now, I'll see you soon. Ta-da.